Join with video. What's going on, Will?
Hey, John, how are you?
Oh, I can't complain, bro. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It's a Friday and it's sunny here in Jackson, and that combination doesn't happen super often. So, um,
That's what's up.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. This is something
Yeah.
it's funny. I think you're the voice that is interviewing people and talking with people more often. So it's a chance for me to have you share and kind of sit back and listen. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Shoot.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Do you mind giving me a little bit more of your background, where you're from, where you're calling from, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, man. I'm born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, south side of that city, neighborhood called Oak Grove, Bellmead, Blackwell. Went to James Madison University, got a degree in economics that I do absolutely nothing with. And I'm calling you from Atlanta, Georgia. Moved here in 97, 98, and been here ever since.
Wonderful. My brother's a Richmond Spider himself, so I know the
Oh,
city.
wow. U of R.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city. He raves about it. He's actually out west himself now, but a pretty special spot for sure.
Yeah, people love Richmond. I feel like Richmond is one of those cities that you have a greater appreciation of it if you're not from there.
Interesting. And what kind of brought you to Atlanta?
I knew I wasn't going to live in Richmond. So I was like, all right, where are we going to go? And, Atlanta, up and moving, just real progressive city. So I was like, Atlanta it is.
Wonderful. So I guess the connection with the two of us that is funny. I know your face and your voice well, having attended the Moth here in Jackson, and so it's kind of one of those beautiful moments where one person knows the other, and the other person doesn't know the other quite as well. So I would love to hear more about your storytelling experience, how you got into that, and kind of a little bit more of that background in particular. Actually, tonight we're having that full table. I'm too bummed you can't make it, but I think the storytelling component of the dynamics in the country right now is fascinating, and I'd really love to hear your perspectives and background on that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I guess I come up with a bunch of storytellers, not in any formal way, but my dad and my uncles, they'll spin your yarn. They'll tell you the most amazing story about something that may or may not have happened that you've ever heard,
Yeah.
So I grew up with a lot of that. And then when I moved to Atlanta, I get into spoken word poetry, performance poetry. And poetry is really it's just storytelling. It's storytelling, but it might be rhythmical. It's like rhythmical storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And, as you hone your craft in poetry, spoken word, just makes you a better and better storyteller. And then over the course of time, door opened for me to host the Moth. And they were like, when you come to the first event that I ever went to, they were like, come tell a story. I was like, cool. They were like, do you have any stories? I was like, I have stories forever. I have stories till the world stops spinning. Now, what do you want to talk about? So I went on stage and won the Moth that night, told a story about my dad's funeral. And they were like, hey, would you like to start hosting, these events for us here in Atlanta? Cool. So I started hosting the Atlanta Moth storytelling events. And then that led me to being able to go out and host events everywhere. So, I've hosted Moth events in California and Hawaii and London and just all over.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, so that the Moth platform, a little bit more background on that, is what is the main platform on which it's shared?
Mainly the Moth is shared on stage, a lot live stages. So that's their things. They're dedicated to the art of first person storytelling, where an individual walks on stage with no notes and tells you a story that is usually on a topic of some sort. So that is mainly what they do. Of course, a lot of people know them from the podcast, but the podcast is just recordings from the live shows. So if there were no live shows, there'd be no podcast.
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, I can be a testament to the fact that that live platform, I mean, it's pretty amazing to have people come on stage and share a story, like again, without notes, right? I mean, that component by
Yeah.
itself is people really speaking from the heart, and you can see them working through the stories as they tell them. On the evening
Yeah.
here in Jackson, so Jackson is, I looked it up the other day, it's something like 0.05% of a Black community here in town, right?
Right.
Miserable when it comes to diversity. And it was wonderful that evening to have not only yourself hosting, but we had, I believe it was three of the speakers were in the Black community, and then our very own Brolin from town here
Yes.
was, I think that was super important I think for the community to have Brolin speaking at that event. Um,
Yes.
it was wonderful. Can you share a little bit more about as you navigate those places? You said Hawaii, London, Jackson, Wyoming. Is that something that
Yeah.
that diversity and everything that you are you experiencing that or?
I mean, some places are more diverse than others. I think that what the Moth tries to do, especially a show like a main stage show like the show you saw, is that they look at where they're going and they look at the voices they want to elevate, and then they try to bring those voices in. So at Jackson Hole, as you pointed out, there was myself, there was Roland, Andrea Collier was on that show, and young lady whose name just escaped me from Kansas City. I think she's on that show also.
Yes.
So they brought a lot of stories from people of color onto the stage that night in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which you might be like what's happening here? But man, what a beautiful night! And then afterwards, getting to sit and speak with members of the community. When we had dinner after, we went to a dinner at a local restaurant, and a lot of people came and joined us. And it's amazing is that when you go on stage and tell your story, it gives people like license for them to tell you their story. So when we went to eat, so many people came up and they were like, oh man, I heard this story and it reminded me of this story from my life or this story I've heard from a friend. So telling a story like gives people license to share their story also. And it just, begins this like echo chamber of us, individuals just trying to, understand and learn each other through our collective stories. And I think that when you hear a story from someone that doesn't look like you, may not be from where you're from, and that story resonates with you and reminds you of something from your life, it's also an illustration of how we have far more in common than we do differences. People like to elevate and highlight the differences, but the commonality that we share, I think, far outweighs anything.
Yes. Yeah. It's fascinating to hear you say that the Moth, it was an intentional decision to have that community or that select group of speakers or storytellers that evening come to that stage. Is I think that's a beautiful thing, right? That they're saying, hey, we could have had 5 local white guys come up on stage here and share, but to bring these voices to it is pretty magical. Can you speak more to the storytelling with how you see it, if you see it, and kind of how, like, the power of it with what is happening right now? I know that my main, my main kind of way of hearing about things and staying up to date is social media, right? Which is not the most phenomenal news source by any means, right? I know that to be true, but
Right.
it is a live story on a regular basis from a million voices. And I think
Right.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, because I was talking with a friend the other day and they had mentioned something along the lines of, is there a modern day Martin Luther King? Is there a singular leader that is guiding this charge? And I landed the conversation with, I think that because of social media, everybody has a voice now, and that everybody's able to share their stories or share the stories of somebody else. And in doing so, I think it's harder for a single leader to step forwards, and that it's like almost actually more powerful that everybody has the potential for leadership. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think so. It's interesting. I've heard Martin Luther King brought up a lot during this time, which is always so curious to me when you think of the legacy of Martin Luther King, of how much he at the time was reviled, how he was labeled a terrorist, how he was at the time considered one of the most hated people in America. And then as much as people were like, well, where's the Martin Luther King of now? I'm like, but you killed the Martin Luther King of then, so
Yeah,
it's
wow.
a complicated thing to wish for the Martin Luther King of now, seeing what happened to the Martin Luther King of then, which is what happens with a lot of the really, really powerful voices that emerge and, come, like stand above the fray and say, this way, follow me, your Martin Luther Kings, your Malcolm X's, your Marcus Garveys, go on and on and on. These
Mhm.
voices are typically stamped out. So what you have with social media, of course, is you have 1,000 voices raising at once, which gives you there's no head to cut off. So that's a powerful thing, is that there's no leader to be stopped. But then you get into the question too of, when you have like a spearhead, it focuses what your attack is. So a lot of times when they look at some of these things, they'll say, well, what's being demanded, right? As if to say what's being demanded is beyond justice, but they say what's being demanded. And there's no voice to stand up and say this is what's being demanded, no clear one voice. It's like 1,000 voices that might want 1,000 different things, although those 1,000 things may all be justified and, like reasonable wants. But it's
Yeah.
not like, one person, one body given, these are the list of things that we as a collective want. So I think that is a position that could uh, work against you to some degree. But I think it's beautiful that everyone's getting a voice. It's yeah, it's like the gift and the curse, because it goes both ways. Because as much as people are elevating these progressive voices, then you got a lot of non-progressive voices being raised also. And
Mhm.
you gotta listen to it all and filter through what's true and what's not true. That's the thing about the moth, is the moth, by their edict, it's a collection of true stories. Is that you have to bring a true story. The
Mhm.
issue with social media is you don't know if the story is true or not. Like, when Amy Cooper, without the aid of the video of Amy Cooper standing there clearly lying about this man, if you didn't have that video and she just told you her story, you'd be like, oh my, a black man attacked you and your dog in the brambles and, in the park. That's ridiculous. So it's also about what voices are elevated and the veracity of the story. You know what I mean? So I
Yes.
think that's where you run into so many issues with social media, is discerning what is true and what is not.
Completely. Is there a platform you would point someone like myself to that is a more honest and kind of true platform?
Well, no, I think on social media, what you have to do is you find the individuals that are giving it to you straight. So
Mhm.
it may not be, MC get busy at 158. He might not be telling you the most honest thing, you know what I mean? But you might get someone like a Sean King or someone that you followed and be like, oh, well, then this person gives you straight dope every time. And so it's like with anything, like you have your trusted sources, like when they reported years ago, when they reported that Prince had passed away. I think TMZ reported it. The
Hmm.
very next thing I said was, someone else has to say this. You know what I mean? Like a CNN, there's a source that I trust that has to say this beyond TMZ before I'll believe it. The same thing is true with social media. You can read anything and then say, all right, well, let me go look. Let me go find another source that will corroborate this, or a trusted source of mine that will say something, before I just, run off with it like this is the gospel.
Yes. Yeah, that I think verification component is huge. I was again talking with a friend the other day, and the how quick things are changing is really
Yeah.
fascinating, and it's hard to keep up with. It's so, for example, on Black Tuesday or Blackout Tuesday, excuse me, that post a black square, right? That is a symbol of solidarity, right? And
Yes.
it's like people who I haven't seen post in 20 years are coming
Yeah.
out of the works to post this black square, right? And I myself did it. I'm like, hey, you know what? I believe in this. This is something that I am supportive of. Like if
Yeah.
this is a sign of solidarity, I'm
Yeah.
supporting that, right? Post a square. Within 10 minutes. I mean, you're laughing already, you know, because you know where I'm going. In within 10 minutes, I see a post. Don't post a black square because it's hiding all the important things that Sean King's posting, right? And all these other leaders that are, or all these other people that are saying the really important actionable items. And again,
Right.
that resonated with me, and I'm like, wow, you know what? Like, that makes a lot of sense. I'm kind of embarrassed that I posted the black square, and so I went through and I removed it. And it's funny because it's the most classic example of groupthink and kind of being a sheep, right? Oh well, they said do
Right.
this, do that. Let's say do
Right.
this. Okay. And so, how do you feel about that? Like, kind of that speed of change, as well as the the idea of intent, right? Because in my mind,
Right.
validating it by it's out of good intent. But hey, it could not land. You know, people could say, hey, you didn't post a black square, and leave it there because that's the move. And so it's really fascinating to play through those things right now. I think
It
as
is.
a person in general, as well as I think especially as a white person, that you are trying hard to show your solidarity and be supportive, but is me having you on here right now counterproductive, right? And like every moment I think about these things, it can easily be like, well, is that wrong? Is this wrong? And so I think that if it lands with love, then it's okay to be making mistakes. That's how I've been trying to think of it, at least. But I would love to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on that.
I think that critical thinking is necessary in all of these things. You got to just think about it critically. So with the black square, they're like, post the black square. Here are the reasons. It's a show of solidarity. It was begun by the music industry. It's this, Blackout Tuesday thing. What happened, of course, was people would post the black square and then they were using the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So then the issue was this Black Lives Matter hashtag is throwing, if you search that, you just get a bunch of black squares and then you're not getting the information. So that's the part that people kept saying, take down the black square because it's blocking the information. I was like, it's not. It's the hashtag that's blocking the information possibly. You know what I mean? So
Okay.
I had my black square up. I mean, I never put a hashtag to it, so I just had it up and left it up because it's a show of solidarity. It's an interesting exercise in seeing if you can coalesce people around what would be the smallest, you know, the smallest show of solidarity. Like you don't have to do anything. You have to leave your house. You don't have to march. You got to put your shoes on. You got to put your pants on. All you got to do is post a black square. Can we all just do that? And if we can't do that, then how can we come together around, larger issues where we want to come together as a group? This is nothing. This is the smallest barrier to entry into a quote unquote protest. You don't have to do
Yes.
anything. So I was like, well, this is an interesting social experiment to see if we can do it. So much like you, I did it. Immediately I started to be, take it down, don't do this, don't this. I was like, this is curious. I said, how can you coalesce around anything as a group if you can't even get the black square thing together? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that was just very interesting. It was a very interesting thing to watch. And I was just interested in all of it. One, I was like, all right, what group's going to do it? What group's going to be against it? And what group is going to, like, they can't just post the black square. Like some people would have the black square and then inside of it would be like a fist or inside of it would be like something else. Cause I was like, cause people have to do their individual thing. They're like, I have to put my individual spin on it. I can't just be part of the group and just do what the group is doing. So it was interesting to watch that play out, to hear all the different voices and takes, and which is, what it is. You're going to get a ton of that. But it makes me think of the Birmingham bus boycott, where, these people in Birmingham, to fight against what was happening on the buses, they either walked or caught a ride to work for, I think it's like almost a year or so that they did this. Now you want to talk about a complicated, entry into a protest movement, and they did it collectively for so long that the bus company had to sit down and talk to them and say, okay, what do you want? And that's much harder than
Yeah.
posting a black square. So
Without a doubt.
I don't know. It's an interesting conversation about trying to find these places of unity around, this common goal and this common push. And I think that's where you also run into the issue of it's a million voices instead of just maybe perhaps one voice that has like elevated itself above the fray, and people can coalesce behind that voice. And maybe that voice can say, well, this is what we're doing as a group. And then the group does it. But where it's a million voices, you got, a million people like, I'll do it. I won't. I'll do it. It's stupid. You get all of this interesting back and forth.
Yes. Yeah. That's the, yeah, I completely hear you. The you can post it out your pants on point. I think that lands perfectly, right? It is such a low entry point to show your solidarity. And like, yeah, the Birmingham bus boycotts, it's like, that is a well organized, persistent, structured thing that like it's incredible. I do wonder about the longevity of certain like kind of trends, right? Or I guess it would be specific ways of protesting, right? That big protests in the big cities right now, and actually even in small towns as well. There's one in Jackson the other day. And is that going to continue? Is that going to be something that is, as soon as those 4 police officers are indicted and hopefully they face like some penalties there, but that they are, the protests going to stop right after that, and so that longevity component I think is instrumental. It feels that the willingness to walk from this city to this city and to participate in a bus boycott and to consistently call your senators and call your local mayor and all that kind of thing, that it's not a one-time ordeal. And that's tough. That's tough.
It is, but you have to figure out that. So this is the thing where you need this voice and this vision, because you have to know what you're fighting for. So if you're fighting for the indictment and the conviction of the gentleman who murdered George Floyd, well, then then once that happens, then it would be over for you. Do you know what I mean? That's where you have to look at, well, what are you fighting? What is the long-term goal of your protest? Now, if the goal of your protest is that, then yes, once that happens, it's over. Mm-hmm. But if you have a larger goal, so I feel like all protests have to have certain things for the long run. You have to have people who agitate in the street, you know what I mean? People who march and protest peacefully. You're gonna have people who agitate, which they would consider like your rioters and all these people who are going to agitate and really shake things up and cut off highways and really get into that. You got someone who's going to stand above and speak eloquently on the subject to really, put into words what everyone is thinking and feeling, that people can be like, that person is saying, what needs to be said in a way that I can't, but I can get behind what's being said. And then you need people pushing forward legislation that will, counteract whatever, the injustice is. With Dr. King, what you have is all of that happening with this one person in this one group. They're marching, they're sitting at counters, they're agitating, he's speaking loudly and eloquently in a way that, even if you're not behind it, you might hear him for the first time and be like, that guy made all the sense in the world, I'm with him. And then they're pushing forth legislation, which is the Civil Rights Act. If you don't have all of that, then I feel like some part of it's going to fall down. So right now, I feel like you've got at least the first 2. You've got some speeches being made that I don't know if they're going out, to the masses in a way like a Dr. King speech would. But some people are making some very powerful speeches. And then the question is, well, what is the legislation that's being pushed forward to make sure that this can never happen again? Or if it does happen again, there are very stiff penalties. So if the last part is the goal, then once these gentlemen are indicted and hopefully convicted and properly sentenced, well, then you keep pushing because you still have to get the legislation part done. But if the legislation part isn't happening, then once this part is over with, well, then it all comes to an end until the next tragedy.
Yes. Yeah, those are, I think, really good touching points, that it's easy to view those as separate entities happening at different times. Like, oh, there's protesters happening here, and there's the rioters who are looting buildings, and there's a little bit more of that anger there, or not anger necessarily, but I guess
they're angry. It's
Yeah,
anger.
yeah.
They're mad.
But there's anger with the protesters as well. So maybe a little bit more disruption there, right? Um,
Right, right.
and yeah, that they are they are either unique entities, but at the same time, like you're saying, they're so intertwined because if if that is the goal to pass legislation and move things forward in that manner, that having the other succeed would seem to me to be imperative. Do you believe that, or is that something that?
No, it's all imperative because every action in some way raises the profile of the injustice, the case, the situation. There are people who,
Hmm.
when they see a peaceful protester, it resonates with them like, oh man, I get that. There's some people who are like, you can peacefully protest all day, I don't care. Then there are people who are like, oh wow, these guys are really like raising mayhem, and that's what really catches their attention. Like we got to do something, or these people will burn the city down, and then that pushes them to action. There's some people going to be moved by an eloquent speech. You make a speech and they're like, oh my God, that really hit me. I mean, everything reaches different people in different ways, and it all pushes you toward the ultimate goal. Like it's a rolling current taking everyone down the same, river toward,
Yeah.
the same, ocean of, justice that we're going for. So it all works together. It, like you said, it seems like separate things just kind of happen, but it all works together. If you look at people who love Martin Luther King so much, I'm like, if you actually go back and look at what they were doing, all of it was coming together to push you toward the same goal.
Hmm. Yeah, the history component. So I was just talking with a friend of mine last night. His name's Charlie. He's from Rwanda originally, and he came over to upstate New York, where I'm originally from, and our families kind of became a greater family. It felt like, right? He came to all of our Christmases or birthday parties, that kind of thing. Play basketball with him growing up, and we were talking last night, and he was really emphasizing the history component. And I think that yourself as a storyteller, do you see potential for that story of history to be rewritten to be more factual? That he was saying that the important parts of history are not taught. That, okay, like if you're in a finance class, that
Right.
don't tell you about Black Wall Street, right? You don't learn that. You learn about the numbers, and that
Right.
like, oh, the Middle Passage, we all know that was a long time ago and really sad, but that it's impacting people today, and that's
Yeah.
somebody's great grandfather, and so do you see potential for that history to be rewritten at this time?
Well, I think that some of the history needs to be rewritten. Some of it needs to be written. Like some of it's just never even
Hmm.
been told. I think that in knowing history, of course, it helps you to really one understand the repetitive nature of it. Like I posted a speech from James Baldwin. He did it in 1968, and that speech could have been he could have gave us that speech could have been given yesterday. I said, and
Yeah.
this is a tragedy. It's 50 years later, and it's the same thing. But there's a tendency for some people to think that this is new. This is happening now. You know what I mean? I'm like, no, this is happening now. This happened 50 years ago. This happened 50 years before that.
Yep.
Now, voices get louder. People come into more prominence, more power. With what they can do to affect that change. But they're still battling the same injustice, the same racism. They're fighting the same things. So history is an interesting thing in that you can inform people of stories. People have an interesting narrative they've been given. So they'll say to you, why are you complaining? Why don't you just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? The people love the whole bootstraps. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And then you can point them to Black Wall Street, to the Tulsa riot, and say, well, here are Black people who pulled themselves all the way up by their own bootstraps. And then out of an anger that they had done that, you leveled the whole thing. The whole thing was leveled down. And that happened there. It happened Rosewood. You can name city after city where Black people had carved out this niche and had risen all the way up, only to find it torn all the way to the ground. So
Mm.
when people have that narrative and then you can hit them with this history, what I mean? It's like, nice. It's a very nice story you tell. But let me tell you what actually happens when you do that. It doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't work that way is racism, which is what we're here to fight. So let's just get back on that. Once we get rid of the racism, then let's start the bootstrap pulling. Let's see what happens then after we get rid of that.
Completely. Yeah, the phrase, Charlie and I were talking last evening about that Americans all have equal opportunity but not equal equity is not true. And that equal opportunity is the idea that, oh, everybody came to America for the American dream. It's like, no. They were taken from their countries and brought here in chains and made into slaves. And it's this whole history that is not based on equal opportunity. And so that whole bootstrap idea, and it's completely undermined by that racism, like you're saying. It's goodness.
Well, yeah, and it's a unique experience of the African American that there is no other group. So sometimes there are these ideas of what is known as the model minority, which is typically pointed to as Asian Americans. It's like, these are the model minorities. Look at how they've ascended and all these other things. And I'm like, but there's no other group that has come here against their will in chains. And then once you even release the chains, you put laws into place to really see if you could return them to a state of slavery, like, all right, we'll free you, but what we'll put in place are the most aggressive vagrancy laws you've ever seen. So we freed you, we've given you no money, giving you no place to go. So then when we catch you just free out here, trying to figure it out, well, now we can lock you up and return you basically to a state of slavery. So that's true too. Every other group that has come here, they come intact. You come with your religion, your language, your community, your sense of self, your sense, of what your people are, and you can actually coalesce around that and then build from that. African Americans, that is just everything that was done to us was it was a division game, and we still suffer. We still deal with what was done to us to keep us divided from each other, and keep us basically as much as humanly possible in a state of slavery. We still wrestle with that till this day.
Yes. I'll let you go here in a moment. I appreciate you taking even this amount of time for me, but one of the components I think that I've seen has been really powerful is hearing the famous athletes, right? LeBron James and Maya Moore and Candace Parker and Ed Reed, right? That hearing these individuals speak out about how they have experienced the racism throughout their lives, I think that really hits. I think it should hit everybody equally. That it's something that is easy to say, oh, well, how, like, I know there's racism in this country, but look, LeBron James is doing fine, right? And it's such, right? And it's so ridiculous to hear that kind of thing posted or said, right? And so it's really powerful to hear those voices coming through and saying, no, this is not some blacks are dealing with this. This is the entire Black community has to overcome this. And just because I'm making $1 million a year does not mean that I'm past this.
Well, that success that they have is in spite of everything. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, it's not because of, it's not because of whatever. It's in spite of, that these people were able to elevate themselves and get to whatever position they've gotten to. And there's a New York Times, there's a show called The Daily on New York Times, where I think today's episode is called Why They Protest. And they speak to 5 or 6 different people about the experiences in their lives where they have been discriminated against and how those experiences have led them to, at this moment, find themselves in the street holding a sign or marching. And I think that it's interesting that if you have, Black friends of color, you can almost sit down with any of them and ask them about the day they were called something out of their name, or the day they realized that their skin was viewed differently. Like, because as a kid, you don't actually know it. Even when your parents say it to you, you hear it, but you don't know it. But then a day is going to come when something happens and you know it. And it's a jarring, heartbreaking day. Like, even listening to this podcast, this one guy talks about how this cop called him a name. He's a kid. and how he went home, he didn't tell anyone, he didn't know why the cops said it to him. And I was like, and that's the thing, is that it's so jarring sometimes. You just don't know what to do with it. Like it's like you don't tell anyone, you don't know what to do with it. You just have it. Like even the first story when it happens to me, I think I maybe told that to my mom for the first time maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it happened when I was like 9 or 10 years old. You know what I mean? And I just got around to talking to her about it. Maybe 5, 6 years ago when it came out, like, oh yeah, this thing happened to me. I was riding my bike one day. It was crazy. But these are the moments, man. It's and let me just also say, there's a part of me that understands this, is that white people and black people have a different experience with law enforcement. Like that when I went to college to JMU, I'm around more white people than I've ever been around in my life. So this is my first introduction to, like, all right, let's have this conversation about race a bit. And when I would talk to guys, and they would be like, oh yeah, I was drunk. Cop pulled me over. Cop took my license, told me to get on his bumper, and he drove me home. Told me to follow him, and he got me home. Or, my car broke down. This really nice cop came, changed my tire for me. And I'm like, when that's your experience with the police, and then I tell you what my experience is, you can't, it doesn't make sense to you. It's a non sequitur. You're like, no, that's not the police I know. I'm telling you, they're the nicest people you could ever meet, which I'm like, I get why you think that. I understand that your life has been orchestrated in such a way that you cannot imagine it from the other way. You can't see it. So I'm gonna tell you a quick thing. I know you got things to do.
No.
When I'm in college, my roommate, best roommate in the world, I got named Shane Schliester, my roommate for pretty much my whole college experience. White guy, really nice guy. We went to a party together one night on the campus, and it was the campus is self-segregated in that there are black parties and there are white parties. So he came with me to a black party. Had a good time. We danced, had a great time at this party. We leave the party. We're walking back to our dorm. He's walking maybe, 10 yards ahead of me. We're just kind of walking, straggling home. He walks past campus security, keeps walking. I get to campus security, and the guy says, "Let me see your ID." And I'm like, "For what?" And he was like, "To prove that you're a student here." So my roommate comes back with his ID out. He says, "Here's my ID." And he says, "I don't need to see your ID. I need to see his ID." And my roommate says, "Well, why do you need to see his ID and you don't need to see my ID? We're both just walking down this sidewalk." And then the campus security guy, I think in a moment of realization for himself, says, "Okay, never mind. Both of y'all just go. And then he leaves, and we both leave. And my roommate is so affected by it because I think it's one of his first, real views of, how people will discriminate just randomly based on color or nothing else. And he looks at me and he was like, "That was ridiculous. Like, is it always like that?" And I remember saying to him, "Oh, that was nothing. That's an easy day. Like, if that's the worst that can happen to you discriminatory wise, I like, there are people who don't survive that encounter. That, they don't survive it." And for him, I think it was one of the more informative interactions, that he had dealing with race up to that point in his life.
That's a powerful story. I think that, yeah, it's not much I can say to that. It's as a white individual, there are moments like that where you're what do you mean you deal with this all the time? And that's bridging that gap somehow, and to having people understand what that's like on a daily basis. That's something that I don't know how you do, and I don't know how that is expressed in a way that, oh, now I understand, right? It's like, well, you haven't lived it every single day, so how could you possibly understand it? I mean, right. I talk with my brother. My brother lives over in Russia, and in a very small way, but he talks about his friends in Russia, right? And I'm like, I can't understand. I don't know their faces, right? Even as simple as that, just purely being in a different location than somebody, you can't understand what walking down the street to his house is like. You can't understand the food, the restaurants.
Right.
That's purely based on where you're living and some distance between you, but this is like your neighbor is experiencing a whole different world than you.
Right. Yes.
Wow. Any last thoughts for me, John? I mean, again, thank you so much for taking the time. It's eye-opening, and I look forward to talking with you again more soon, I hope. I'd love to have you sit in on a full table in the future.
Yeah.
And
That'd be great.
if you ever come through again with the moth, please be in touch. I would love to see you in person.
Oh, that'd be great. Yes, absolutely. No, I mean, I guess my parting thoughts for anyone is that, these are complicated times. That there's a famous quote that says, like, a riot is the voice of the unheard, and there are people who've been unheard for a very, very long time, and people who tried to make you hear them in every way possible, in every peaceful, kumbaya way they could do it. They were like, can you, will you listen? And people are like, no, we won't listen. And so then they were like, well, all right, then let's see if you'll listen now. Let me do something else then. Like, one way or the other, you're going to listen. You're going to hear what I got to say. And we can do it this way or we can do it that way. I mean, to me, when people were like, why are people, some people would be like, it's an uprising in the streets. We'd be like, it's a riot in the street, whatever you want to call it. They'd be like, why are people doing this? And I'm like, well, I was like, Colin Kaepernick tried to take a peaceful knee, and people had so much. They were like, no, don't protest that way. And then you do this. They're like, no, don't protest that way. And I'm like, what you really want to say is don't protest. That's what you really want to say. But that's not going to happen. You're going to get it one way or the other. And, famous book by James Baldwin called The Fire Next Time, when he was like, people have tried to do it peacefully. It'll be the fire next time. I keep telling people, what you're looking at, this is the next time.
Wow. Thank you, John. I'll be tuning into I've been following you on social media for the time being, and I look forward to talking with you more. This is the beginning of the conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, have a great day.
You too. Send some of that sun this way because it's raining here.
There you go. It's sunny but not super hot, so we'll do a little switch on that one.
It's raining and it's super humid. So yes, send all that this way. Send all that this way, bro.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Have a great day.
You also.
Bye.